Again, it's good to stand before you. Ronnie was talking just a little bit before we started about how we do things back home. He made a pretty good impression when he was out there. We've had him out there 3 times, I guess. And not to go overly blunt, we don't invite guys back and do a good job. So we certainly appreciated the way he worked. But that crowd down there, there's no boy named Russell Wadsworth. He knows who I'm talking about. Big left-handed Methodist that we played golf with. And they called me on the way over. I was on the way here, I guess, the other day, and she actually had bought some stuff for Ronnie. She was kind of chewing on me for leaving before she got it to me, but it's a bunch of UT stuff to give to him. So when she gets it mailed to him, I need verification he does wear that University of Texas cap, at least some out here. You know, but that same fellow, this guy ties in with the idea of evangelism. I've known this guy for about 15 years. We're good friends. And I am going to baptize him, probably in a bathtub in the hospital, if the good Lord lets it go that way. I told him before, so listen, I pray that you get a disease. It gives me time, because he knows. He's asked me to do his funeral already. I've done 4 funerals the last 2 years of non-members, of prevalent non-members in denominations there in our town. And I put the plan of salvation, by the way, in every one of them. That goes for theirs and ours when it comes to funerals. But you can disagree with folks and be very blunt with him. His favorite joke with me, I'll be talking about the church. Is it the church? I said, yes, sir, unless you find me another one. There's only one in there. You can be straightforward with people, if you know them especially. And they can't, this idea that if you tell folks the truth, they don't like you, that doesn't necessarily follow. They like Ronnie. They even came and heard him speak 2 or 3 times. They don't come hear me speak very often, but if he shows up, they come and hear him. So you can be both blunt and to the point with the truth, and yet still be liked by people. They may not agree with you, but there can be a certain level of appreciation that is there if we live what we preach. The key, again, is don't be a hypocrite. If you really believe it, and you really teach it, and you really stand for it and stand with it, folks put up with a lot of that from us. Now, the idea this morning's lesson is motivation. Why do we do what we do? Why are we engaged in evangelism? What is our motives? And brethren, we can ascribe all manner of motives which are not right. The idea of proselytizing, which would be another word for evangelism, I guess, has gotten a really, really bad name in our day. Perhaps you work somewhere where you can't really bring up religion. They'll kind of get on you about that kind of stuff. To me, it's kind of like prayer, though. You can't outlaw prayer. Now, I do think there are some ramifications that have been socially in our country that go along with the culture that is attacking prayer. Do you really need this thing on? I'm making this wrong. Look at me. Excuse me. There. But when you have a culture who is so anti-God that they will not, they publicly come out against prayer, that is a problem. And I think we've seen the consequences of that. But you also cannot command a Christian not to be involved in proselytizing. That's what we do. Everything about us. Recall the apostles? When the crowd saw him, it says they took note of them because they had been with Jesus. You can't hide who you are. And I can't hide who I am. Not if I'm faithful. We won't talk like they talk. We don't act like they act. You ever met somebody and just in casual conversation, you started thinking, I bet this person's a member of the church. You ever had that conversation? I haven't thought. And then you ask them, and they were. You can just tell sometimes. I can be listening to the radio, and you hear some guy preaching. Maybe I'm over here in a foreign country like Louisiana. I'm going through a place like that, and you hear some guy preaching, and you're like, I bet that's the Lord's church. And sure enough, get to the end of it because our speech betrays us. So when I say evangelism, I mean it in a very, very broad way. Yesterday's lessons are very specific. They dealt with actually one-on-one Bible study, methods to go through, ways to do that. That's all wonderful. That's good. But there's a step before that. And that's who you are. And that's how you act. And that's how you treat people. And that, to me, is the attractant of the gospel. When I see someone, we've all done this, someone that you see and you kind of want to model yourself after them, you want to be that couple, you want to be that family, you want to be that congregation that other people look to you and say, that's how it should be. Because they see us reflecting God in what we're doing, what we're trying to do. So then specifically, what is it that moves us or motivates us to evangelize? Well, the first reason we do it is because God told us to. It is a commandment from God. Brethren, I don't buy into this leftist approach to things, that if there's an obligation tied to it, somehow there's something wrong with it. We have folks in the church that don't like the idea of obedience, the idea of commandment. You ever heard a preacher get up and say something like this? Well, I guess you could do it because God told you to, but it's better to do it God gave those 10 commandments. There was nothing subpar about a person obeying those commandments because God told them to. Matthew 28, verse 18, Christ says, go. That's a command. You get up and you get out of here and you go tell everybody what you've heard from me. When God gives us a commandment, I am obligated to do it. So part of why we teach is because God said to. And I'm saying, don't buy into that psychological trap that says, well, your Christianity is based on thou shalt and thou shalt not. Yes, and so is yours if you're a Christian. There are some things in there that I do just because God said to do it. Why must I be baptized? I don't see any sense in that. Do you? And I know there's a typical situation there in Romans 6, 3 through 6, how the type, when the old man's buried, he comes forth. But why in water? If God didn't have that in the book, you wouldn't dream it up yourself. It's kind of like circumcision for the Jews. I don't think you'd have dreamed that up. But God had them do it. And with Christianity, God commands us things sometimes that don't necessarily make sense to us. They have an obligation to do what He says. I obey because He said, Matthew 28, verse 18, go. What do I have to do? Get up and go. Well, we have to have a spirit that will obey what God tells us in the area of evangelism. 2 Timothy 2, verse 2. You take what you have learned and you commit it to faithful men. You know why I brought my boys this week? I wanted them to be here. I wanted them to see this. I wanted them to see brethren in another state. By the way, my oldest boy has fallen in love with Alabama. He said, I know where I'm going to live. I ain't going to leave Texas. So don't be recruiting him, but nonetheless, he kind of thinks this is pretty. He likes that kudzu. I said, son, we got briars back home. He said, no, that's pretty right there. We had to stop and take pictures of kudzu last night, going up those trees. But nonetheless, the point is that I want them to see that across this land, there are congregations doing what we're doing back home, trying their best to spread the truth. So when the world is telling you all the time, it's just you, you're just small and pitiful, and nobody else thinks like you do, and nobody else is doing what you're doing, number one, that's not true. If it were true, it doesn't change the truth, but it's not true. Brethren, we be brethren. We're a family. And we are scattered all over, not only this country, but the whole world. If you drop off a plane in Texas, and you drop off one in India, or you drop off one in Alabama, or anywhere else, and the brethren there are faithful, they're going to be preaching the same thing we're preaching right now. Maybe a different language, maybe a different accent, but the same message, because we follow the same God. So we do it because God told us to. I have an obligation to pass this on. But my boys again, I don't know if either one of them is ever going to preach, ever be a deacon or an elder or not, but down the road I could foresee 50 years from now, one of them serving the church somewhere, wherever, doing whatever. Someone says, what can we do to help evangelism? And that 9-year-old boy may say, you know what, I went to Alabama one time when I was a kid, and they had a weekend seminar. How do you think these ideas spread? How do you think these things are passed on generation to generation? Part of what we're doing in evangelism, I'm commanded by God to pass it on. Why is our country in the mess it's in right now? Because, brethren, we as a nation lost our heritage. We did not pass on the patriotic ideas, the work ethic, the principled morals of the previous generations. And because of that, we are seeing terrible consequences on a national level, are we not? It also happens in congregations. You all know congregations that at one time were stout. I mean, they were leading the charge for the truth. And maybe they had radio programs and TV programs and publishing houses, and they were right there on the forefront. And now they're still on the forefront, but it's pushing the church off into liberalism. Abilene Christian University is not very far from my house, about an hour west of where I live. They were formed in 1906. You know what happened in 1906? That's when the church split. And they were formed as a conservative element trying to hold the line for truth. They quit doing that a long time ago. It can happen inside these walls. It can happen inside our walls if we don't fulfill this command. You pass it on. You make sure, teachers, elders, deacons, preachers, our obligation is to pass on to this next generation. We have 2 camps back home. In the senior session this year, our theme is going to be Passion for Jesus. I get sick and tired of this out of high school kids. You ever notice, I'm sure y'all aren't that way. But you look at them, it's kind of, well, you ask them questions. Now, if a song comes on, man, they're getting it now. They're enthused and they're zealous. And you girls like One Direction? I got $2 too. Oh, yeah, this one's cute. Now, I don't even know. My girls, though, they're nuts on those guys, right? You know, you get some kind of band come through, some kind of group come through, and we're enthusiastic. Football, And we play football back where I come from, although y'all's college has done fairly well lately. It's amazing what they can do with Texas running backs. But anyway. But the people here get as crazy. I know you do because you're winning, right? Because everybody here kind of pretty much, I guess the Auburn folks aren't. But the Bama fans are happy as they can be right now, aren't they? By the way, speaking of that, do me a favor and at least beat A&M this year. I am sick and tired of those Aggies. Okay, we had them under our thumb. I'm a UT guy. We had them under our thumb forever. They limp out of the conference, 5th place when they leave, and then beat y'all up here. Just maybe 6th. So take care of that this year. But the point is, we have an obligation to pass the truth on. 2 Timothy 4, 1 through 4. Preach the word. Be instant, in season. Be instant, be urgent. See the need. What about our high school kids? I'm trying to get them. Maybe they have more concern than I think I see. But it bothers me to see a Christian look like this. You know, just no emotion, no zeal, no commitment. Brother, I know you shouldn't be a giddy fool, but shouldn't we be happy? Aren't we telling folks that we're living the Christian life, John 10 verse 10, the abundant life? The best life you can live, friends. Listen, God has not withheld one good thing from us in any area of life. Let me say that again. Let me slow down. I know I get kind of excited and speed up sometimes. God has not withheld one good thing from us. Amen. You know, the devil has us thinking if you're a Christian, you're missing out on all the good stuff. You can't have any fun. You can't do this. You can't do that. God has not withheld anything from us that is good for us. That's a fact. And I need my kids to know that. You need your kids to know that. We need to remind ourselves of that. Sometimes folks sit around, just filled with self-pity and just whine about this and whine about that. We don't have very many difficulties at all. Typically, a lot of folks whine. The brother that had the heart transplant, I commend him for being a month ago. We get folks back home, get a hangnail. 6 weeks later, they still want to visit for the preacher. I got a sore thumb. Boy, get up. I'm sorry. Get up. Go back to church. What's wrong with you? And it's a heart issue. That's the next sermon when we deal with the excuses we make. I do because God told us to. And again, maybe I'm overstressing this. Don't buy into the idea that there's something somehow subnoble about obeying God's commands. Matthew 7, verse 12. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's a command, isn't it? The golden rule. How can I disobey that and be noble? How can I ignore that and be honorable? You can't. So we must have a heart that is obedient and submissive. Now this is a big issue. We're dealing primarily on our side of the fence, what motivates us, next hour, what excuses we make. But excuses in the world are, a lot of folks don't want to submit to God. That's the long and the short of it. They don't want to be told what to do. And we've got some, I don't know what you call them. I don't call them preachers, but even pulpits and congregations should know better. You ever run across these conversational kind of preachers? Just kind of talk and just kind of go along. You just kind of throw stuff out there, just kind of whatever. They're not teaching anything that's false, but they're not preaching. They're not passing on the doctrines. They're not stressing what God commands you should or shouldn't be doing, how you should be growing and shouldn't be growing. They're not challenging us to change. If I do not change from sin, I am not a saint. There's got to be conversion in there. There has to be a reshaping of my personage into the image of Christ. Yes? That's right. That's a challenge. And you can't go from the world to heaven without having massive reform in your person. And how you think. The Beatitudes, those aren't natural reactions to life. The Christian virtues, those don't come easy. The fruit of the Spirit, that takes a lot of work. Patience and kindness and love and all those things. Now, those aren't natural and normal. But I can get there with God's help. With perseverance, with practice, and with study. So one thing that motivates us is simply the act of obeying what God says. I go teach because God said go teach. Why are you here this morning? Because God said to. Now, hopefully there's more to it than just that, but that is a reason, isn't it? Another motivation. How about this one, the value of the soul? Genesis 1, 26 to 27. Why do you go to work? You change that. If starting tomorrow you were not going to get paid to go to work, would you go? Would you get out of bed at the same time and fight the same traffic and deal with the same bosses and put up with the same folks around you if they weren't going to pay you? Why do you work? Because there's a value tied to it. So part of why we try to convert people is we see the value of their soul. You may have a car. Why do you pay them the money you pay them? Because that car is valuable to you. The same is true when it comes to relationships. Maybe when you were dating, anybody here try to bribe the girl to go out with you? You ever buy flowers? I bought my wife flowers every week last year. Every week for a year. I bought her roses. But do you ever do them when you're dating? Do they buy flowers for your special other? Do you ever write her a poem? I bet those are doozies. Remember those things? Roses are red and violets are purple. I love you more than maple syrup and water. You kind of jot this stuff down, trying to impress her. But there was a value in that one to where you didn't care if you embarrassed yourself with your little, by the way, she still got that stuff, doesn't she? And by the way, the rose thing once a week was a real good idea, but writing that card once a week was tough. Trying to think of 52 different sweet things to say. My wife and daughters had a lot of fun laughing at my little attempts at poetry. But the attempt counts, okay? I value her more than anything else on this earth. My buddy said, that's a waste of money. It's the best money I ever spent in my life. She got looking forward to those flowers every week. We spend time, we put effort into things we value. Brethren, souls are valuable. Genesis 1:26-27, we are made in the image of God. That's what I have to see. I think it was Brother Shannon. I like the phraseology, a phrase I'm going to steal and use. He talked about when you start, you're looking into the eyes of the devil. And when you finish, you're looking into the eyes of a brother or sister in Christ. That's the idea here. We see that we have to see in them potential they don't see in themselves. Did you ever have a coach that way? Maybe you tried to play some ball and you thought you were too this or too that or not this, but they saw something in you. Maybe you had a teacher. They knew you could push yourself and get more out of yourself than you were. Brother, in a sense, that's how we are when it comes to evangelism. We're the guy at the office who understands there is a heaven and there is a hell, and that person, no matter how they're living, does have a soul and is of great value and worth to God. And we've got to try to show them that. I think there's a lot of folks in our world who don't feel like they're worth very much. We are worth a lot. But the value of the soul, Matthew 19:1-9, Christ talks about in the beginning, God created us, male and female. Now, we live in a time frame, though, that has been more dominated by a different book, written in 1850 by a man named Charles Darwin. He wrote a book entitled The Origin of Species. His follow-up book was much worse, called The Descent of Man. And in that book, you have all the seeds planted for eugenics, which is what Hitler and the Stalinites, the Russians used, when it came to throwing out men, classifying people as mere animals. You keep the ones who are valuable, you destroy the ones who are not. By the way, I'm not sure, given our new health care plan that's going into effect, but some of that's not going to be in our future to a degree, even on this continent. But here's the point. When evolution is taught, that is not an innocuous doctrine. There are problems with it. It's not innocent. When you tell someone you're nothing but a hairless monkey, don't be surprised when they act like it. Brethren, if there's no God, there are no morals. That's what we have in our country now, this relativism. Think about this. I asked our high school kids this the other day in class, and you got to answer this. What would you have to be guilty of, morally speaking, in our day today, with the exception of outright murder, what would you have to be guilty of to be considered immoral? There's not much on that list, is there? Getting drunk, is that immoral? Well, no, that's not immoral. Smoking, well, no, that's not immoral. Fornicating like a bunch of rabbits, no, that's not immoral. Cheating on your spouse, well, no, everybody does. That's not that big a deal. Not fulfilling your obligations toward your kids, no, that's not that big a deal. Not being respectful toward your parents, no, that's not a big deal either. That's to be expected. Stealing, well, you're probably poor and downtrodden. That's not really an issue about what you should get too concerned. Killing your unborn baby, no, that's freedom of choice. But seriously, think about it. What would you have to be guilty of? We live in almost in a soulless culture. Now, we still are creatures with souls, but we have denied the truth about our essence for far too long. And what we're seeing is the consequences of those ideas. Psalm 14, verse 1. You probably know the first half. It says, the fool has said in his heart, there's no God. Second half, behold, they are wicked. They have done abominations, and there is none good. There is no such thing as a good atheist. And that's a fact. Well, I know this guy. No, you read your Bible. Psalm 14 verse 1 says, there is none good. A God denier is not a good person. By definition, you can have no moral standard without a moral standard setter. Without God, there is no good. Without right, you can't have righteousness. And by the way, you cannot have its counter. You can't have wrongness. That's why in our day, there is nothing held up as immoral. Isn't that true? Even when heinous acts are committed, there's this whole line of folks run out there and try to defend the criminal. You hear it every day. Isaiah 5 verse 20, woe to them that call good evil and evil good. Set bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter. Light for dark, dark for lightness. And yet it happens around us all the time. One of my motivations is that in spite of what my world tells us, we still know that each and every person counts. Because they are made in the image of God. And we're motivated to try to save them because of their worth. You know this evolution nonsense? And you have got to be an idiot to believe in evolution. I'm serious. You ever seen them on TV blow up one of these buildings? You ever seen that? You ever seen them blow a building up? Yes? No, you haven't. Do you see them blow buildings down? I want to see them blow one up. You know, you see them implode them. I want to see a train that has metal beams on it, and cables, and glass, and nuts, and bolts, and wood framing, and all the material that you need, concrete. I want everything in that train. I'll put C400, and we're going to blow that train up, and that dust is going to go up, all the material, and when everything settles and all the dust goes away, there's going to be a 10-story, fully functioning, OSHA-approved building there. Is that possible? Shake your heads no, please. That is not. But brethren, listen. That is much more believable than evolution. They had nothing. We had this big bang. What blew up? Well, we don't know. And then you get one that'll say, well, you see, there was a piece of matter. It was really, really, really dense. It was about the size of dense. You're pretty dense, son. Trying to convince me of that. It's something half the size of a pencil eraser, blew up and gave us everything. Now the same people in the train administrations all know that couldn't happen. Brethren, we are surrounded by idiots. And they're writing books and teaching in our colleges. Now, we may have professors in here and PhD doctors, and if you do, so be it. I've got a lot more education than I do advertise myself. I want to tell you something about public education and higher education. Here's how education works. You sit in class, I spoon feed you what I want you to hear. I tell you certain things. If you tell me a certain percentage of it back, I'll say you're smart. That's what it is. Brethren, but if what I'm feeding you is wrong, you know a whole lot about a bunch of wrong stuff. Do you get that? That's the point. And in our culture, from our little bitty childhood days, education, respect doctors, respect PhDs, respect scholars. Not if they're wrong. The scholar said the world was flat. Columbus just found it anyway, didn't it? The scholar said Jesus Christ wasn't the Messiah. That's what the scribes and Pharisees were. They were wrong, weren't they? Smart people thought it wasn't going to rain. They all drowned, didn't they? They said no. Brethren, we've got to get outside of this groupthink approach. Do not lie with the herd. You walk with the shepherd instead. You find out what the truth is, and we stand there. If we don't get our mind right about the value of the soul, and the only place the soul has value is because of God's creative power and how He made us, we won't evangelize anybody. Say what? Souls. Where do they come from? God. What makes it valuable? They're valuable not because of what tax bracket they're in. They're valuable not because of what race they are. They're valuable not because of what economic achievement they have or educational capacity they have. They are valuable because they are in God's image, period. Every one of us and any one of us. Therefore, we are motivated to teach all of them the gospel. When you go out looking for somebody to teach them all. Because God's man hides and God's women hide in some pretty strange places and pretty strange bodies sometimes. When it comes to what the gospel can do once it's received and accepted by those around us. Matthew 16:26, for what profiteth a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what should a man give in exchange for his soul? Our soul is more valuable than all the earth. The next motivation would be this one. I am motivated to try to save people because of the price that Christ paid to offer salvation to them. That's why they're valuable. Do we not see in Jesus how valuable souls are? And I'm not motivated when I see the price he paid. I'm inconvenienced to have 1 hour Bible study and 1 night a week. Brother, he died on that cross. Well, when you see the price paid by Christ, well, when you go through, we don't have time to develop it. When you think about the cross itself and all the reasons he should have got down. I love to preach a sermon entitled The Nails of the Cross, which talk about what kept Christ on that cross. Why should he have gotten off? Well, the physical pain, of course. The beating that he took. Y'all get Ronnie, y'all have satellite TV up here? You get the History Channel. If you ever see this, come on, record this. You may have already seen it. They did a series a couple of years ago. It runs about once a year entitled The Crucifixion. Y'all ever seen that? If it comes on again, record it. And the first hour or so goes through, there's several things there. You can use some of the historical material to help validate, not that needs help, but it helps show that what's said in Jeremiah and in Isaiah and in Psalm about crucifixion, it helps show the inspiration because the inspired writers wrote about crucifixion 250, 300 years before it was even invented. That's kind of an interesting point to draw out. But when you go through the beating that he took, I mean the shoulder blades sticking out through the meat in the back, the skin hanging all the way to the ground from the scourge of the cat of 9 tails, that whip that had the rocks and the metal and the nails and so forth in it with 9 tails on it. The spinal column being exposed, the ribs even being broken in many cases. You know, that thing had wrapped around, ripped all the skin from his belly, basically say from your calves to the base of your neck. All the skin is gone and a chunk of just meat chunks hanging everywhere. And by the way, he typically died of internal bleeding. It seems to be what happened to him. He didn't stay on the cross that long. Then you're put up there, and the heat of the day, you ever had sweat running to your eyes? You imagine the sweat in your eyes, the blood in your eyes, your hand, you can't even wipe it out for hours. There you hang. And the only way you can breathe, of course, he had to push up on the nails in his feet and pull up on the nails in his wrist. And of course, that wood would have not been like this varnished nice wood here, but like a cross tie. That cheese grater effect as that beaten and bloody and mangled back went up and down. I sat in my office one time and I counted how many breaths I took in a minute. I'm not an agate, so I can do the math. I then multiplied that times how many minutes there were in an hour, how many hours he was on the cross. I came up with almost 7,000. Almost 7,000 breaths that you would take over a 6-hour period, pushing up on those nails, pulling up on those nails, and that horrendous pain that he was going through. That was a good reason to get off that cross, but he didn't. How about the shame of it? The Catholics painted nice clothing over his body. The Bible says they stripped him. Well, I read he's hanging up there naked, beaten to a pulp, bleeding everywhere, skin chunks everywhere. And the crowd is mocking him, Matthew 27. He saved others, can't save himself. Brother, listen, this is the same God who opened up the ground and swallowed naysayers in the past. The same God who killed a man picking up sticks on the Sabbath. The same man who slew tens of thousands, yea, hundreds of thousands of Philistines and Assyrians and enemies. These blasphemers are spitting and cussing and making fun of him, and yet he stayed. Spent all the shame of it, and also the ego, John 19, verse 25. His mom was watching. You ever get in a fight when you were younger because your girlfriend was there? You probably took it if she hadn't been around. You ever get dared to do something? Just you and one little boy, I dare you to do that. I ain't doing that. You're crazy. Get a crowd around. What do you do sometimes? Now you got to be a macho man. You got to do it, right? Christ was as human as we are. He's up there. They're insulting him. He had the power to come up there and kill every one of them. Make it stop. You ever thought about why he stayed on that cross? Because of the value of your soul and mine. And when I see that sacrifice, I understand what it means, and I'm reminded of it every single week of the price he paid. He paid that price for us and for all of them. to offer salvation to men. I can endure a little bit of momentary unpleasantness. I know it's embarrassing sometimes. We're not real comfortable trying to bring this subject up. We're kind of afraid of what they're going to think. We're some kind of weirdo. You are a weirdo, by the way. That's what Peter said. We're a peculiar people. Oh, and we all live in the South. That makes us double weird in our own country, right? They make fun of us all the time. So be it. I wouldn't. Like the bumper sticker says, you make fun of the South all you want to, but nobody's moving north. Right? That's exactly right. But brethren, we know the truth. You see, we have to do this. We're motivated to help them in spite of what they think about us. Matthew 26:39, God's will kept him on that cross. That's where he says, Father, not my will, but thine be done. I want to drop all the way down to Hebrews 12, verse 2. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He endured the shame. He despised it. He took it to offer salvation to us. So when I see the price that Christ paid, I know the fact that Matthew 26:28, the blood we just drank, it says, behold, this is my blood, which is shed for the remission of sin. When I think of the price he paid for souls, I will endure a little bit more hardship. I will lose a little bit more sleep. I might go ahead and be made fun of a little bit at school or work. But I will say a word in an attempt to try to draw someone into a Bible study through which their souls can be saved. I'm motivated, and so should you be, to save people in spite of how they are. You ready to bite your tongue? I do it quite a bit. Somebody says something stupid. They say something, they're insulting. Well, you folks down there, and what comes out of their mouth next is as false as it could be. We've been accused of everything, haven't we? By the way, go back and read historical records, though. Go back and study the kingdom of God's church. In the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, read what Tacitus said about us. Read what some of the Roman Marcus Aurelius said about us. Read what Diocletian said about us. They accused Christians of being cannibals because of what we just did. They accused us of being guilty of incest, which was not true. They accused Christians of being murdered because we had to hide in dark places and being secretive. Well, we were secretive, trying to avoid getting killed. The point is, every generation has had their cross to bear. So grow some hair in your chest and carry your own cross. That's the point here. We've got to do what's right in spite of the days in which we live. That's always been the challenge. It was true of Daniel. It was true of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It was true of Noah, and it's true of us. We sit back sometimes, we mope and whine. Well, you ever heard somebody talk about the good old days? I'll tell you one thing, I sure do miss back in the good old days. Let's discuss that good old days thought for a second. I think sometimes we in the present excuse ourselves from our obligations in the mindset that, well, nobody else has had to put up what we had to put up with. Let's just stay in our country. When was the good old days exactly? Drop back to the colonial days, those good days. You ever read what happened to the framers of the Constitution? You ever read the history of what happened to those folks that signed the Declaration of Independence? Most of them lost all their wealth. They were tried as traitors. Some were put to death. Many were in prison. That was a tough time to live. Only a third of our population fought for the war. A third fought for the English. And a third tried to stay out of it. That was a very tumultuous time to be a Christian, wasn't it? All right, fast forward to the days of the pioneer days. Out in my country, probably yours too, we had some natives here that weren't just real prime on giving up their land. Those Comanches and Apaches we had pretty rough. So there you were out there in your cabin, getting attacked by Indians, dying of everything. Pneumonia would kill you, snake bite would kill you, the drought would starve you out, lightning would burn you out. That wasn't a real good, easy time to be a Christian to live, was it? Fast forward to the early 1900s. We had a thing called the Dust Bowl. Had the Depression. Had a war called World War I where millions died. Crazy men in Europe fighting, drawing our guys into it. We broke down here. Jerry Clower would tell about whenever he grew up down here in Yazoo City, Mississippi. Said they were so poor down there. Said, all you eat would be gravy. Lived in no shotgun house, no running water, no electricity, dry cow. Said then the Depression hit. It was tough. Well, fast forward to the 40s, 30s and 40s. Well, now you had the Depression still going on, the lingering there for the late 20s, early 30s. You got all the gangsters up in New York, the bootleggers all down through this country making whiskey and haunted up north, people getting shot and killed, and the folks cut the other night. And of course, nobody had any money still. Then this guy Hitler comes along, World War II, and again, drag the good old boys over there, turns over here, split up. What's going to do? I skipped the Civil War, by the way. That caused a little bit of angst, didn't it, among the brethren? Then you fast forward to the 50s, you got the Korean War. 60s, here come the hippies, all the drugs and sex and rock and roll and messing up the morals of the country. 70s, Jimmy Carter shows up from Georgia. He should have stayed home, ruins the economy for us all. Here comes Reagan, 6 or 8 pretty good years, but don't forget, it was all the way to 84 before he normalized unemployment. Then we get Slick Willie out of Arkansas. Then comes Bush, and then comes Obama, and here we are. Exactly when were the good old days. Get the point? Brethren, life is life. And every Christian has had a cross to bear. And every church has had difficulties to face. And my motivation and yours has got to be, we're going to save our generation from themselves. We're going to show them Jesus, Romans 12, 1 through 2. We're going to live that Christian sacrificial life and show them the way that leads to glory. We're going to do everything we can. The word ecclesia, church, ecclesia, called out. We called them out of sin. We called them out of self-destruction. We called them out of the guilt of sin and shame. We called them out of a guilty, abusive, self-abusive life. We called them out of hell. You're also called into something. You're called into sainthood. You're called into salvation. You're called into justification, 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11. We're called into the Lord's church, 1 Corinthians 12, verse 13. We're called into a life that means something, John 10, verse 10. We're called to a life of promise. What is John 14, 1 worth to you? Let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many mansions. I go there now, listen to this now, and believe every word he's saying to you, to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you might be also. Brother, we call people to a life that has hope and promise and meaning, and ultimately we call them into heaven itself. Matthew 25, 46. We are motivated to help them. It's kind of like raising your kids. How many of your kids were brain damaged when they came out? I got a boy, he's here, I won't call his name, but Dawson. He'd eat candy and drink Coke every meal if I let him. Well, I won't let him, because if he eats that way all the time, it's going to have an adverse effect on him, right? So as a parent, sometimes you have to save your kids from themselves. Mine did too. I look back on it and wonder how in the world my poor folks survived. I used to be hard-headed and kind of want to do things my own way. My wife says I still am, but she's wrong. But the point is, we all have to wear that hat sometime, don't we? At work, maybe you have to implement some rules to keep folks from doing things detrimental to themselves. We're also motivated by the example Christ left us. If I am truly going to imitate Christ, if I am truly going to imitate the apostles, I've got to be involved with people. And when I say evangelism, again, don't make it too complicated. I'm simply going to try to teach people and show them the way that's right. Show them Jesus. Luke 19, verse 10 was his approach. Acts 1 and verse 8, they taught publicly and house to house. And a final thought, we are motivated because we love them. Let me tell you this too. A lot of misconceptions about love. Agape love is not emotional at all. Now listen to me. I'm commanded to love my enemy. I'm even told I have to like them. There are plenty of folks I don't like. Well, that's not. I like most folks. But there are a few folks I don't like. I don't have to like them, but I have to love them. See, when I say love in America, you think, oh, that's not love. Jesus Christ didn't want to go to that cross. He did not want to emotionally go. He's praying in tears and sweat up his blood. He says, Father, if there be any way, let this cup pass from me. But John 3:16, love, agape love, caring for our ultimate good, forced him to do what was needed for us, what was best for us. We are motivated because we know what awaits. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 11, knowing therefore the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. The Hebrew writer points out it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a consuming fire, and it's a fearful thing to fall into his hands in a lost condition. I know what's going to happen to them even when they don't. And I care for their ultimate good in spite of how they may or may not receive it. That's why I love my neighbors. I love my friends. I love my fellow church members. I love my enemies. You can't find a single country in this world where Islam has made the world better. None. But 1 billion souls hang in the balance. when it comes to trying to teach folks who've gotten into that false religion. Same is true. Catholic Church has 1 billion members as well. Hinduism has 1 billion as well. 7 billion. Half of them fall within 4 world religions. You know that? So it behooves us to learn a few things about those religions and do what we can to get the truth to them. Friends, the Lord gives us plenty of reasons to reach out to those who are lost. I don't know which one of these motivations moves you the most. I don't care. But grab a hold of one of them, whichever one it is that moves you. And let that be the fire that drives you on a daily basis, a consistent basis, to look for folks to either teach personally. You are teaching them anyway. Your attitude teaches. You know, when you ever had this happen to you, you work with somebody 3 or 4 or 5 years, you're a Christian. They're there as well, and they're a Christian. And there was nothing in the lives of either of you where you even found it out. You ever found out somebody, oh, I went to the Church of Christ, and you're shocked that you are. I've seen how you've been talking. I've seen how you've been acting. I've seen your attitude. Brother, you can probably sometime reverse that. Let's make sure they can't say that about us. I had a good friend of mine. I'll close with this. Gary Vickers. We worked together last year company when I was in Tyler. I was about 18. He was probably 21. And we worked together for 2 years. And Gary, he actually got shot and killed one night. He was somewhere he shouldn't have been. Got in trouble and got killed. And I was at his funeral. You know that song we sing, You Never Mention Him to Me? Now, he and I had a couple of talks, but kind of like to understand his point. There's a difference in a couple of little talks and really pursuing a Bible study. And we never really had gotten to that point. I told myself that day, I would never again go to a funeral of somebody, he was a good friend of mine, somebody that I really did like and really did have some connection with, and not have brought it up. I'm not sure I've always gotten that done, but I always try. We'd rather that time you think, well, I'll get to them later, I'll get to them later, I'll get to them later. You ever have somebody move off and you lose your opportunity? I'll bring it up later, I'll bring it up later, I'll bring it up later, and they die. Or somebody else comes along and kind of hooks them into a world religion, a religion of men, and you have a hard time ever getting them out of that. Brethren, let's do not put off to tomorrow what we know we should be doing. We can save only the living while they're alive and while we're alive. Let's do what we can to reach out and save those around us. If you're here this morning not a child of God, we are very thankful you're here. The way you become a Christian is by believing in Christ. John 10, verse 16. You also repent of your past sins. Luke 13 and verse 3. I've got to realize that we were wrong and turn away from that. Turn toward Christ. Then we have to confess our faith in His matchless name. Romans 10 and verse 10. We repented of our sin. We believed in Him. We've confessed Him. There's one more thing to do. I must be baptized for the remission of my sins. Acts 2:38. Again, Romans, I think, written for hard-headed guys like me. Romans 6, 3 through 6. It says, the old man of sin comes to the watery grave, and he's buried, he pushed to death, he mortifies the old man of sin, and he comes forth a new creature. That is the place wherein the sins are forgiven. I don't know why it's that way, but it is. I find myself in the same shoes as Naaman. Remember Naaman? He had leprosy. Goes to the prophet. What do I have to do to get rid of leprosy? Go to the Jordan River and dip 7 times. That doesn't make any sense. That's a nasty river. We have rivers back home better than that. You ever find yourself arguing with God? He argued with God and he was still a leper. When he obeyed God, he went down there and dipped 7 times. He came out cleansed. And so will you. It's almost ironic that hell will be full of people begging for water, many of whom rejected the waters of baptism while in this life. Friend, if you hear this morning, you're not a child of God, we beg you to come. If you are, 1 Corinthians 15:15, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, insomuch as you know your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Do not grow complacent in the area of trying to reach out to others. Be consistent. And we'll discuss some of the problems with that we have to get over in our next lesson. If you respond to the Lord's invitation, I want you to do so now. Together we stand. And as we sing, won't you come?